All right, guys. Thanks for joining me today. Okay, we've got a great story for you all today because what I want to talk about is one of those stories that I think is important that we shed a light on and truly dissect. So there is a new development in Ghana that has been going on over the last couple of months, where Ghana is deporting and driving away Liberians and demolishing their camp. And this started in February of this year. It has been going on since last year, but this year in February, they really intensified the demolition of the camp where Liberian refugees were housed in Ghana right after the civil war that broke out in 1989 happened in Liberia. So a lot of Liberians have been displaced. A lot of Liberians have been kicked out of Ghana. Ghana, again, is causing undue hardship to its fellow African neighbors. And so I want to talk about this because should Ghana be doing this? Because we've seen this before. This is not new. This behavior from Ghana is not a new behavior. It's something that we've seen repeat itself in history. Ghana did this against Nigerians. And now we're seeing it against Liberians, refugees, who Ghana took in. Right after the civil war broke out, Ghana, like many other African countries, like Sierra Leone, like Guinea, took in refugees to their country to help Liberians during their civil war. And they were not the only ones that played a role. Nigerians sent military soldiers to die for Liberian civil war. So Nigeria played the most significant role in that. However, Ghana was the one country that housed more of the refugees, but they were not the only ones. So why are they now kicking them out after these refugees have been in Ghana over 34 years? Many of whom are Ghanaian citizens, many of whom have had kids who have been raised in Ghana and have become part of Ghana. Why is Ghana doing it? Right? It's again history repeating itself because we often see Ghana play this type of role and do these types of hardship and undue hardship against its African citizens whenever they go through an economic turmoil. They did it against Nigeria. In 1959 and 1969, when Ghana's economy flatlined, it drove Nigerians, millions of Nigerians out of their country. And now we're seeing it again. Now, here's the caveat to this, is that while Ghana is causing undue hardship against Liberia, who is their neighbor and their African citizen, they're welcoming their home to Westerners, Black Americans. So we're gonna have a conversation, but let me give you the headlines, right? And then we'll talk about this because it's a bigger conversation to have. Because Ghana has often portrayed itself as Pan-African. It is often said that they're a Pan-African country. So is this Pan-Africanism, where a fellow African country or citizens from a fellow African who are part of the ECOWAS? So Ghana is part of the ECOWAS community, which is why they were obligated to help Liberia. And that was a good thing. But now they're causing undue hardships to thousands of Liberians who are now homeless in the streets, men, women, and children, whose home have been bulldozed and community have been bulldozed. And now they are all homeless in the streets of Ghana, and they're driving them out of their country. Is that Pan-Africanism for a country who claims that they ride on the back of Pan-Africanism to inflict such a harm against one of the African countries, but then open up their doors to Westerners? So let's talk about that. That's the conversation today. All right. So here is some headlines. So according to Reuters, it says Liberian civil war refugees left destitute after decade-old Ghana camp demolished. Budu Boram, on March 5th, this was when this article was written by Reuters. Now it says here, sitting on a tattered mattress amongst the rubbles of former home, Wendell Elijah Malabi is one of 15,000 Liberian refugees left destitute after authorities in Ghana demolished the camp where he had lived for more than 30 years. I don't know anyone in Liberia, nobody. They burned the village I was living in, said 55-year-old Malobi, who arrived in the camp in 1990. After fleeing Liberia's civil war, my bed, TV, clothes, everything I've worked for is gone. More than 200,000 people were killed and thousands more were mutilated and raped in brutal civil war in Liberia between 1989 and 2003. Now, though the UN ruled in 2006 that it is now safe for refugees to return home, many traumatized and without connection remained in so-called Liberian camp in Budu Buram, about 45 kilometers west of Ghana's capital, Accra. But last week, under the order of traditional authorities who owned the land, demolitions of the camp began. By Monday, a large part of the site where once bustling Liberian camp stood for 34 years was reduced to concrete rubbles. Only palm trees remain standing. Residents picked through the wreckage of their destroyed, once brightly painted home to salvage belongings as bulldozers plowed on around them. In the nearby point, Hope Basic School, women, children, and elders slept in impoverished beds, left destitute and homeless. Okay, so let's talk about this. But before we talk about this, I want you to take a look at this video clip to show you the site at this camp and how Ghana's authorities and Ghanaians have left Liberian refugees destitute. Take a look at this.
Hundreds of Liberians in Ghana's capital Accra have been left homeless after their decades-old camp was abruptly demolished. It had been a home to those who fled Liberia's brutal civil war through the 1990s. Liberian camp chairman Dennis Guion said people were surprised because authorities hadn't even made an announcement.
So at the end of the day, we thought it was like joke, but they begin to demolish. People you see sitting here, they lost almost everything they had.
Over its 35-year lifespan, the Liberian camp had developed into a thriving community with its own markets, schools and other services. On Monday, the refugees were sheltering in a school.
This morning, the Ghana government, in collaboration with the local chief, came around to demolish all this area where the Liberian settlers used to go on. See, I'm surprised, but it's very sad, it's very sad. The Liberian refugees have been in Ghana since 1919 to date, in 34 years. They have been living here. Not only this place, this is the camp all the way going over there. But they have been told several times to leave this place. But unfortunately, yesterday they came around and carried out this exercise. It's very sad. I don't know how these people are going to sleep tonight. I don't know.
A few months ago, this area housed thousands of Liberian refugees who, for some 3 decades ago, fled Liberia's civil war to seek refuge here in Ghana. But if you look at me today, all those structures have been demolished. Now, this area, alongside all the over 500 acres acquired to house these refugees, have come up for demolition from February all the way till the end of the year, when the project is hoping to be completed.
Okay, so let's talk about this, because I think this is very, very interesting that we're seeing yet again Ghana. You know, I have often talked about how Ghana is a facade in terms of their pan-Africanism. I've often called out Ghana's so-called pan-Africanism, that's such thing that we've known that was something that was championed by, Kwame Nkrumah, Ghana's first prime minister. We know that whole behavior of looking out for the fellow African is something that Ghana has fallen far from. Ghana has fallen far away from being a Pan-African hub. their behaviors over the last few years has not demonstrated pan-Africanism. And yet now we're seeing Liberian refugees being displaced in Ghana. Now, when you ask a lot of Ghanaians why this is being demolished, they'll tell you that our land is owned by chiefs and people who are needing those lands. Right? That's what you hear from most Ghanaians, is that this was supposed to be a temporal stay. It wasn't a permanent thing. Right? That the land where that camp where the Liberian refugees have been housed, they'll tell you that the owners of the land who donated that land to Liberian refugees are needing that land because their families who are needing those lands, and that's why this demolition is going on. That's what you will hear. Okay? Let's give credence to that. Let's say, for argument's sake, that is true. Now, here's where I have a problem with that. Because if you're saying that you're driving African refugees, those who have been displaced due to a civil war outbreak in their country, who have lived in that camp for over 35 years, because those lands need to go back to the owners of the land. If you're saying that that's the argument, then how are we supposed to then accept the other situation where there are lands in Ghana, Asebu, Ghana, by owners who are being snatched up and given to Black Americans, so-called Black Americans who are now in Ghana? How is that just and how is that righteous? Someone please help me understand that. Help me understand if that is the argument that Ghanaians are making, because I tell you that that argument is flawed. Because you can't tell me you're taking land away from Liberians who are now destitute in your country and left waste in your country because of so-called lands given back to the owners. And then at the same time, with the same breath, you're taking lands from Ghanaians, indigenous, in Asebu, in places in Ghana, and giving those lands to African Americans or Black Americans who are now in Ghana, displacing Ghanaians. So help me understand that. How does that make sense? Because I'll tell you it doesn't make any sense. I'll tell you that that argument is flawed, because it doesn't make any sense that you're destroying the lives of men, women, and children who are Liberians, who have now become Ghanaians, by the way. 34 years is a long time. Many of whom have had children since then, contributed to the Ghanaian economy, and are living there, and have made Ghana their home. You take those ones and you demolish their camp only to provide and welcome Westerners into your country. People, by the way, who sold slaves in America. Black Americans whose people bought and sold slaves in America, who have been going around with this grifting thing about how Africa sold us into slavery. These same people bought and sold slaves for profit in America, whose ancestors also fought against the abolishment of slavery in South Carolina, in Louisiana, in Georgia. So they come to your country to grift you with the emotional manipulation that they're coming back to the land where their ancestors were stolen from, and many of whom point hands to Africans and say Africans sold us. You hear you hear the so-called Black Americans will tell you this. You know, they shame a lot of Africans and say you sold us into slavery. But they want us to forget that their own people bought and sold slaves in this country, to the point that they also joined the Confederate soldiers in the United States to fight against the abolishment of slavery in this country. That's why I have no love for a lot of people that call themselves Black Americans, because it's a grifting mentality. So you have these ones go to Africa, right? Go to Africa, and then Ghana falls for the okie doke with the whole year of the return thing. And then Ghana snatches land away from their own people to give to these Westerners whose people participated in slavery, in the transatlantic slavery, to give to them, while now displacing their own brothers and sisters in Africa. Somebody help me make this make sense. Someone help me make this make sense. Because when we call Ghana out of these things, people will say, oh, you're being mean to Ghana. Because here's the point I want you to understand with this. That Ghana is known to do such things against their West African brothers and sisters. I told you Ghana did it against Nigeria twice, 1959 and 1969. Drove millions of Nigerians out of their country when they were going through economic turmoil. That's what Ghana does. They forget and throw out pan-Africanism. They throw it out the window, right? A country that will use it conveniently, use that to gain sympathy and try to grift the world. They throw it out when they're going through economic hardship, when every country aids them. And now we're seeing Ghana do the same thing because they're going through an economic hardship again. The economy is flatlined. Now they see the refugees in their country, Liberians, are a problem. Now they're kicking them out. And the excuse you hear from Ghanaians regarding this is the same old BS excuse. They're saying that this camp is filled with a lot of crimes. Does that sound familiar? That there are a lot of drugs. Liberians are are dealing drugs, committing crimes. Boy, I wonder where we've heard that one before. This is the same thing they said against Nigerians. When Ghanaians were taking out xenophobia against Nigerians a couple of years ago, even in the middle of COVID, it's the same BS excuse they used to take out the evil against their own fellow men and women. What such hypocrisy and shame? And so my whole blood boils when I see a country who is grifting the world and claiming to be a pan-African country do what's anti-pan-Africanism against their own African brothers and sisters. And then they open their doors to Westerners. Here's what's ironical. Here's the irony about this whole thing. Let me tell you what's the irony about this whole thing. You're going to laugh. Here's the irony. The irony with this is that the Black Americans they're opening their doors to and the Liberians they're kicking out of the country are the same people. The so-called Black Americans who they're opening their doors to today were descendants of African Americans or Black Americans who were sent to Liberia in the 1800s, who went to Liberia. So the descendants of the people they're kicking out today are the same people whose descendants they led into the country. You can't make this shit up. I'm telling you, you can't. You can't make this shit up. So, so-called Black Americans, beware. Because just give it another 10, 20 years from now, the same Ghana that's welcoming you in, give it 10, 20 years from now, I guarantee you they're going to be kicking you out of their country. Because Ghana is known for that. They're known for throwing away their morality. They're known for throwing out their character of good deed. They're known for throwing out whenever they go through economic crisis. See, Nigeria never did that. Nigeria, in all its years in history, you will not find any xenophobia attack against any of Nigerians, visitors or migrants or immigrants in Nigeria. You will never find any such story. There are Lebanese in Nigeria. There are Indians in Nigeria. There are Chinese in Nigeria. There are African Americans living in Nigeria. There are Ghanaians, lots of them, thousands of them in Nigeria. And over the years, you won't find one. The one situation and the one time that Nigerians drove Ghanaians out of their country was in 1983. And that was a retaliatory response to Ghana doing it twice against Nigeria. In 1959 and 1969, Nigeria remembered and retaliated against Ghana in 1983. That is the only time that Nigeria drove anyone out of their country. But we've seen Ghana do it several times, even as recent as during the COVID situation, when everyone else was trying to stay healthy and be well and trying to avoid this virus. Ghana saw that as an opportunity to exert xenophobia against Nigeria. Ghana has continuously done this against its fellow African country while opening arms to Westerners who are part of their demise, by the way. And you guys often hear me say it, that when it comes to Black Americans, I have no love for most of them, because a lot of those who call themselves Black Americans, that whole identity is shrouded in anti-African rhetoric, anti-African hate. That whole community has now become a community of grifters, a community that perpetuates hate against Africa. So I don't have love for them. I don't have love, and I call out to hypocrisy. My love is for African Americans, those who at least identify as Africans and identify with their African roots. I got love for them. Those ones are the ones I call my brothers and sisters. But you find quite a lot of them in there too who call themselves African Americans, who have an anti-African spirit. I have no love for either one of them either. Because just like Ghana, the hypocrisy of Ghana, to walk around calling itself pan-africanism, and I call that out, is the same reason and the same way I call out so-called Black Americans who point to everyone else as injustice against them through slavery while they participated in it. While they participated in it for years. For years. They benefited from it. They profited from it. They dealt harshly with our people in this country. Do you know that they are Black Americans or African American, whichever you want to call them, who are descendants from others who the only slave master they knew were Black people? Did you know that? Did you know that there are Black Americans today, or African American, whichever one you want to call them, who live in southern states, whose ancestors, the only slave owners they knew were other Black people who owned their family? Killer Mike is such a person. Killer Mike, you guys know Killer Mike, right? You know Killer Mike. He said it, that his family was owned by other Black people. He was owned by the Crawford family. He said this. And I find Killer Mike to be one of the brilliant minds in that community. I have such a respect for him. I find him to be one of the brilliant minds, and he was brave enough to say it. And there are thousands of them. And these ones are the ones that go around calling themselves Black Americans. And shaming Africa while they participate in the same thing they're shaming Africa for. That's why I don't have respect for them. And I will never value anyone that calls themselves Black Americans. And these are the same ones that Ghana is stealing from their people to give land to them while displacing their African brothers and sisters from Liberia. All right. The hypocrisy. So I'm going to say this and I will close. I think Ghana, the country of Ghana, is a beautiful country. I think that for most part, Ghana is a country, when I look at some of the good things historically they've done, those are not things that you forget. The days of Kwame Nkrumah and many others who called and championed for the unity of Africa, those are things that I will always forever be grateful for, and I will always give Ghana the kudos for it. So the country is a beautiful country. However, over the last few years, we've seen the rise of either grifting president, like the current one they have, who are in bed with the West, who will do anything to stay relevant. including lie, cheat, grift, scam. They'll do anything to stay relevant. They like to be in front of the camera. They like to be on TV. They like to do mouthpiece. While the essence of what that whole country was founded on, they've gone so far away from it. They're exactly the same like the so-called Black Americans, who embarrass the entire African American community, which is why I have no love for them. You almost cannot, it's almost hard for you to credit a lot of the work that African Americans have done when you start to hear the rhetoric and the hate that's spewed out from these so-called individuals who want to take the glory from their own, from African Americans, and talk about we built the country. How about you leave Africa and go build your communities? You know, you often hear these ones. They'll tell you, go back to your country. How about you leave Africa and go build your communities? The same communities that this one's burnt down. During the protest, the Black Lives Matter protest, they burnt those communities down. They've left it unbuilt. And they now run to Africa. They go grift Africa with the so-called slavery thing, which they participated in, by the way, which is why I'm calling them out. I have no love for these ones. Because these ones cloud and murky the waters of good men and women from the African American community who fought and died for something in this country. Who fought and died for the benefit that these ones are grifted off. They murky that whole thing. And so it's hard for you to see the true pioneers of pan-africanism in that community, because all you see are these lazy ones. The culture of gimme, gimme, who won't work for anything, who won't stand for anything, but they float around with every trend. Anything that is trending, that's where they go. Now they can't get reparations from white people. They want to get it from Africa. And they want us to forget their participation in slavery. It's not going to happen. That's why I have no respect for them. So when you find these two dealings, it's a catastrophe. Ghanaians and their behavior and their grifting mentality and the so-called Black American. It's a catastrophe waiting to happen. And I think that it's high time that we as Africans, those who know the history, call this out. Because I sure will. So we can allow good Ghanaians and good African Americans who fight for something, who are paving the way for something, we can remember who they are and call out these charlatans in these communities who murky the waters and want to make us feel less down when their people were part of the same evil they point hands to. That to me is worth calling out. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Please like the video, share the content, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you all next time.
Det finns ingen annan där som kan stå här by my side, oh why. Sättet du rör på det får mig att dö för dig baby. För de här yardis, de vill ju bara dra ner oss. Men du är fett och vanlig, och det jag lägger upp